The silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a thick, heavy blanket that smothered the dying embers of laughter in the crisp night air. My sister, Megan, the family's dazzling golden child who could turn any situation into a stage, was frozen. Her perfectly made-up face, which had been twisted in a mask of cruel amusement just a moment before, was now pale and slack. The crowd of my father's wealthy friends and partners, people who measured worth in stock prices and square footage, weren't looking at her anymore. They were all staring past her, their eyes fixed on the simple, state-issued license plate of my beat-up Toyota Camry. A quiet murmur rippled through the onlookers, and I saw the night's guest of honor, Ambassador Thorne, lean towards his aide. The aide's eyes widened, and he whispered something to the ambassador, his voice laced with a sudden, dawning awe. It had all happened so fast. 30 seconds earlier, I was just trying to survive another one of my father's mandatory galas. He was a real estate mogul, a man whose love felt conditional, tied directly to public perception and success. The valet circle of the five-star hotel was a parade of European luxury. Bentleys, Maseratis, and Porsches purred as they were whisked away. Then there was my car. My humble, decade-old Camry. As I handed the keys to the valet, trying to be as invisible as possible, Megan saw her opening. She always saw her opening. "Oh my God, Sarah, is that your car?" she shrieked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the polite chatter. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger, a diamond ring catching the light. "Is that your little babysitting ride? Don't you get an allowance for gas?" Her friends and a few of my father's associates chuckled. It was the familiar sting of 1,000 other dismissals, 1,000 other moments where I was the family's afterthought. I saw the down payment for her first condo that my parents gave her, the European trip they funded after her graduation. The internal ledger of slights I kept locked away just flipped to a new page. For a second, the heat of pure humiliation washed over me. But then, something else took over. A cold, quiet calm that I had learned in rooms far more dangerous than this hotel entrance. My training kicked in. This wasn't just an insult anymore. It was a breach. She was drawing attention. She was creating a variable in a controlled environment. I stood there, my expression unreadable, as the last of the laughter died out, replaced by a confused tension. They could feel the shift, even if they didn't understand why. They saw my stillness and mistook it for defeat. It was in that moment that the ambassador's aide spoke, his whisper just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Sir," he breathed, his eyes fixed on my license plate. "That's a blue plate. A Section 7 blue plate. That's diplomatic security." The words dropped into the silence like stones into a still pond. The confusion on Megan's face curdled into horror. My father's forced smile collapsed. He had no idea what a blue plate was, but he understood the tone. He understood the immediate chilling respect in the aide's voice, a respect he had never, ever heard directed at me. She thought it was just another Tuesday, another chance to remind me I was the family failure. She had no idea she'd just loudly announced the presence of a covert federal agent to a crowd of international business leaders, right in front of the man I was sworn to protect. To understand the silent, professional reckoning that was about to unfold, you have to understand the two lives I was living. Living two lives is a strange and exhausting thing. In one, you are a ghost, a footnote in someone else's story. In the other, you are the only thing standing between order and chaos. For years, I drifted between these two realities, and the whiplash was a constant, private ache. My family only knew the ghost. They cultivated her, watered her with their indifference, and were comfortable in her shadow. They had no idea who I was when I wasn't with them, and the truth is, they never bothered to ask. It was easier to keep me in the small, safe box they had built for me. I remember one Sunday dinner, not long before the incident at the gala. It was the usual affair at my father's glass-walled mansion, a place that always felt more like a showroom than a home. He stood at the head of the long, polished table, raising a crystal glass of wine. The light caught in it, a perfect, sparkling jewel. "A toast," he boomed, his voice full of the easy authority that came from a lifetime of being obeyed. To my daughter, Megan. She just closed the Kensington Tower deal. 20 floors of prime commercial real estate. She's not just selling buildings, she's building a legacy. A real legacy. Everyone cheered. Megan, seated to his right, beamed under the praise. It was her native element. The warm sun of my father's approval. I watched her, and in that moment, I didn't just see her success. I saw the commendation letter sitting in my classified inbox for a threat assessment I'd written that prevented an attack on a consulate. I saw the quiet handshake from a visiting dignitary's security chief after a flawless protection detail. I saw an entire world of achievement that was invisible here, because it didn't come with a commission check. After the applause died down, my father turned to me, his smile becoming softer, more condescending. "And how's your little government job, sweetie?" he asked, his voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Still pushing papers for the DMV?" I took a breath. "I work for the State Department, Dad." I said it quietly, but clearly. He just chuckled and reached over to pat my hand, a gesture he'd used since I was a child to end conversations he found boring. Of course. A steady pension is nothing to sneeze at." He then turned back to Megan, and the conversation moved on, leaving me in the wake. I was the ghost at the table again, the reliable, boring government clerk. It was a role I had played for so long, I could feel the costume settle over me. But the person they saw at that table, she wasn't the real me. The real me lived 1,000 miles away in Virginia, in a world of scorched asphalt, sweat, and the absolute certainty of physics. The real me existed on a sprawling concrete training ground, behind the wheel of a 4-ton armored SUV. The air there didn't smell like expensive perfume and roasted duck. It smelled like burning rubber and cordite. There. I wasn't, sweetie. I was Watcher 1, and my voice didn't get dismissed. It got obeyed instantly. "This is Watcher 1. We have hostile contact, vehicle at 3 o'clock. My voice, amplified by the comm system, was steady and sharp, cutting through the concussive bangs of simulated explosives. "Execute break-and-burst maneuver, now. I wrenched the wheel, the heavy vehicle responding to my command, ramming the aggressor car and pushing it off the track as the rest of my motorcade scattered to safety. "Principal is secure. Exfil route is green," I shouted, my heart hammering a perfect, controlled rhythm against my ribs. Through the reinforced windshield, I saw my superior, a seasoned agent named Director Evans, watching from the control tower. He was a man of few words and even fewer compliments. As I brought the SUV to a screeching halt at the designated safe zone, he simply keyed his mic. All I heard was a click, and then I saw him give a single sharp nod of approval. That one silent gesture from him was worth more than 1,000 of my father's hollow toasts. It was real. It was earned. Later that evening, after the disastrous Sunday dinner, I found my mother, Eleanor, a woman who treated family harmony like a fragile piece of glass that might shatter at the slightest disturbance. She was in the kitchen, carefully arranging leftover dessert onto a porcelain plate. She heard me enter and gave me a tired, placating smile. "Don't mind your father, Sarah," she said, her voice a soft whisper, as if the walls themselves might be offended. "You know how he is. He values things he can see, buildings, profits. Megan's world it makes sense to him. It's straightforward." I just stood there, watching her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her about the training, about the responsibility, about the lives that depended on me being more than just straightforward. But I knew it was useless. Her job wasn't to understand me, it was to manage me. It was to smooth my rough edges so I fit more comfortably into the family picture. "Just try to be patient with him," she added, putting a lid on the container. And in her eyes, I saw the truth. She wasn't my ally. She was the family's chief diplomat, negotiating a permanent peace treaty that required my unconditional surrender. For years, I had accepted their narrative. I let them believe I was the safe one, the footnote in the family story. But at that gala, my two worlds had collided. They had used their power, money, and social standing to humiliate me. It was time to use mine. After the gala, the drive home in my Camry was silent. The lingering sting of Megan's words and the pitying looks from my father's friends had evaporated, replaced by something else entirely. It was a feeling I knew well, a cold, sharp clarity that settles in after the chaos of a threat has passed. The emotional injury was a dull ache, but the professional transgression was a blaring alarm. My sister hadn't just insulted me, she had, through her ignorance and arrogance, compromised an active protection detail. She had created a vulnerability, and in my world, vulnerabilities don't just get forgiven, they get corrected. Back in my small, sterile apartment, I sat at my secure terminal, the green glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dark. Revenge was a messy, emotional word. I was thinking in cleaner terms. I was thinking of protocol. My fingers moved across the keyboard, translating the family drama into the precise, emotionless language of my profession. I opened a new file, After Action Report, Incident 7B Gala. I detailed the time, the location, the subjects. I described Megan's outburst not as an insult, but as an unsolicited civilian interaction, leading to the potential compromise of an agent's covert status. My goal wasn't an apology. An apology from them would be as hollow as their praise. No, I needed something more permanent. I needed acknowledgement, not of my feelings, but of my authority. And so, in the recommendation section of the report, I laid my trap. I didn't suggest family therapy. I proposed a mandatory civilian security awareness briefing. The bait was the venue, a private tour of a secure State Department annex. It was a perfect lure, designed specifically for their vanities. My father's obsession with status and exclusive access would make it impossible for him to refuse. My sister's belief in her own superiority would make her eager to see my little job up close, certain she'd find more to mock. The next morning, I stood in front of the desk of Director Evans. He read my report on his monitor, his face grim, his jaw tight. He was a man who had seen real threats and had no patience for manufactured drama, but he also had no tolerance for stupidity that put his agents at risk. The silence in his office was heavy as he scrolled to the end of my report. He looked up at me, his eyes like chips of granite. "Your sister's lack of discretion put the entire detail at risk, Agent Jensen," he said, his voice low and devoid of any warmth. He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Your request for a formal debriefing is approved. I'll preside over it myself." And just like that, it was no longer a family squabble. It was a matter of national security. The official invitation was sent on State Department letterhead. My father called, giddy about the very important person treatment. My sister texted, "Guess your little job has some perks after all." They had no idea they weren't guests. They were subjects of a formal security review, walking into the one building in the city where my name meant more than theirs. The briefing room was deep in the heart of a building that didn't officially exist on most maps. It was a sterile, soundproofed box, painted a shade of government beige designed to be completely unmemorable. There was no art on the walls, only the stark seal of the State Department and a pair of perfectly hung American flags. This room wasn't built for comfort or conversation, it was built for the cold, hard delivery of facts. I was already there, standing beside Director Evans, a part of the room's unyielding stillness. My simple dark business suit felt more like a uniform here than any designer label ever could. When the heavy steel door opened, my father and Megan walked in. They were dressed for a hostile takeover in a corporate boardroom, him in a tailored Italian suit that probably cost more than my car, her in a sharp dress that screamed power and money. Their expressions were a mixture of annoyance and arrogance, as if they were gracing us with their presence. My father surveyed the Spartan room with a look of disdain, clearly unimpressed. Megan's eyes flickered over to me, a familiar, mocking glint in them. Then the door swung shut behind them, closing with a heavy final thud that seemed to suck all the air, and all of their power, out of the room with it. They were no longer in their world. They were in mine. Director Evans didn't ask them to sit. He remained standing, a solid, immovable object of authority. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice flat and completely devoid of pleasantries. "We're here to discuss a security incident that occurred 2 nights ago at the Ambassador Thorne Gala." He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed directly on my sister. My father started to speak, probably to dismiss the whole thing as a misunderstanding, but Evans held up a hand, silencing him with a single, effortless gesture. "Ms. Jensen," he continued, his eyes drilling into Megan, "your comments regarding Agent Jensen's vehicle were loud enough to be noted by multiple parties, including the ambassador's personal security team." With a click of a remote, a large screen on the wall lit up. It was a crystal-clear satellite image of the hotel's valet circle. A bright red circle was drawn around a single figure, my sister. Her mouth, even from that height, was clearly open, caught mid-laugh. I could see my father's posture stiffen. This was not some informal chat. This was an official proceeding. Megan's smugness began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion and alarm. She was no longer the star of the show, she was a subject under review, a red circle on a screen. Evans clicked the remote again. The satellite image was replaced by a high-resolution photograph of my Toyota's license plate. The letters and numbers, DPL7CSU, were stark and clear. "You referred to this," Evans said, his voice dropping to a colder, harder register, "as a babysitting ride." He let the words hang in the dead air for a moment, before he began to methodically dismantle their entire reality, piece by piece. "DPL," he said, pointing a laser at the first three letters, "stands for diplomat. It designates the vehicle as being attached to a diplomatic protection detail." He paused. My father's brow furrowed. This was a language he didn't speak. 7, Evans continued, moving the laser dot. "That's the threat level designation for the principal being protected. Level 7 protocols are initiated for individuals under significant, credible threat of political violence or abduction." The color started to drain from my father's face. The word abduction did not belong in his world of polished boardrooms and golf courses. Megan's hands were clutching her expensive purse so tightly her knuckles were white. The air was thick with their dawning horror. "And CSU," Evans said, his voice now like ice. "That stands for Counter-Surveillance Unit." He finally turned his head slightly, acknowledging my presence in the room for the first time. "Your sister isn't a babysitter. She is a special agent with the Diplomatic Security Service. Her entire job is to be invisible, to watch for threats, and to neutralize them." He turned his gaze back to my stunned family, delivering the final, devastating blow. "The man you were all so desperate to impress, Ambassador Thorne. He wasn't her boss. He was her assignment." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a worldview being shattered into a million irreparable pieces. My father, the great real estate mogul, looked small. The arrogance had crumbled, leaving behind a confused, terrified old man who suddenly understood he had been playing a child's game next to a loaded weapon. He stared at me, truly stared at me, as if for the very first time. There was no recognition in his eyes, only the blank shock of confronting a reality too vast for him to comprehend. Megan was worse. Her face was a mask of pure white-hot shock, her mouth slightly open, a silent scream trapped in her throat. She hadn't just been mean. She hadn't just been a bully. She had been a danger. She had interfered in a federal operation. My father had built his empire on knowing the value of things. In that silent, sterile room, he finally learned that the most valuable asset in his family was the one he'd written off as worthless. The silence in that room was a living thing. It pressed down on my father and sister, stripping away their expensive clothes and their lifetime of unearned confidence, until they were just two small, terrified people. Director Evans waited a long moment, letting the weight of the truth settle into the very bones of the room before he spoke again. His voice was final, a judge delivering a verdict. "The debrief is concluded," he said, his eyes still locked on them. "A car will escort you from the premises." He gave a subtle nod to a uniformed Marine security guard standing by the door, who stepped forward without a word. I watched them leave. My father wouldn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the floor, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. Megan followed him, her face pale and blotchy, her eyes wide with a fear I couldn't quite decipher. Fear of the government. Or maybe, for the first time, fear of me. They were escorted out like strangers, which I suppose is what we had always been. When the heavy door clicked shut, I was alone with Director Evans. He turned to me, his expression unchanged. "You handled the initial contact by the book, Agent," he said. "Don't let them be a liability again." It wasn't praise. It was a professional expectation, a statement of fact. And it was the most profound validation I had ever received in my life. 1 year later, the air tasted different. It was thick with the smell of diesel, street food, and the humid promise of a monsoon season. From the balcony of my office, I looked out over the sprawling, chaotic, beautiful capital city that was now my home. My title was no longer just agent. I was the Assistant Regional Security Officer at the U.S. Embassy. The promotion had come 6 months after the debrief. The beat-up Camry was a distant memory, replaced by the black, armored SUV that was now my mobile office and my responsibility. My world had expanded beyond belief. Earlier that day, I had stood before a dozen of our Marine security guards, my voice calm and steady, as I briefed them on the new motorcade routes for an upcoming diplomatic visit. These were young, capable men who looked at me with a respect that was clean, simple, and absolute. There were no mind games here, no hidden subtext or passive aggression. There was only the mission. They didn't care who my father was or what car I drove. They cared that I was competent, that I was clear, and that my planning would help keep them safe. In their eyes, I wasn't the invisible child or the family footnote. I was the arso. I was in charge. My real family, I learned, wasn't one of blood, but of shared risk and mutual trust. I found them in the embassy's secure canteen, a place that buzzed with a low-key energy. It was here, over plates of questionable local takeout and strong coffee, that I truly belonged. I'd sit at a long table with my DSS colleagues and the Marine Detachment Commander, and we would talk. We'd joke about the ridiculousness of a close call, the absurdity of a bureaucratic snag, or the eternal search for a decent hamburger in a foreign country. The laughter was easy and genuine, the camaraderie born from knowing that the person sitting next to you literally had your back. There was no performance here, no need to prove my worth. It was simply a given. This evening, sitting alone in my quiet office as the city lights began to sparkle below, I was clearing out my personal email inbox. And then I saw it. An email from Megan. The subject line was just a single tentative word, sorry. I clicked it open against my better judgment. It was a long, rambling message, full of excuses dressed up as apologies. It was about how she was under so much pressure from our father, how she never really understood, how she hoped I was okay and could find it in my heart to understand her. It was all about her. I read the words, and I waited for a feeling to surface. Anger, satisfaction, pity, anything. But there was nothing. Just a quiet, calm distance. The internal ledger I had kept for so long was blank. The debts had been cleared, not by her apology, but by my own peace. With a single, deliberate click, I moved the message to the archive folder without replying. At that exact moment, my work phone buzzed on the desk beside me. It was a secure alert from the Marine on duty at Post 1. I glanced at the screen, my focus instantly shifting to the here and now. I put the phone down and turned back to the window, looking out at the vast, sprawling city that was now my watch. My sister laughed because she thought my old car meant I was going nowhere. I learned that true value isn't what you drive, but what drives you. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.